Should be recording. Yep, recording. Well, thank you everybody for taking up the invitation to be part of our Zoom article. And before we get started, I'll pass over to Gavin. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you very much, Gina, and a privilege to be here. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land by which we are all meeting on today, and I know that we all are sitting on Aboriginal land across the country. I'm on Larrakia land in Darwin in the Northern Territory. I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their ongoing connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to all elders, past, present and emerging. It's a privilege to be in this space. It's a privilege to work on the country that we do, and it's incumbent upon me to do really good work, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this group today.
Thank you, Gavin. And also, I just want to acknowledge Keith in Aotearoa. Yeah, and I was just wondering, Keith, Tēnā koe. Did you want to say anything about where you're coming in from, and because we don't have Hini Werangi here?
Well, standing in for my mentor and fire and friend Hini Werangi, I'll just offer some brief words and say ena matawaka, ena mana, ena reo, ena rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, which basically is acknowledging the waka, the canoes on which we all arrived in these lands, however far back, acknowledging your authority, acknowledging your languages, and acknowledging your leadership. And for myself, I want to say what I've just put on my name, which is Ke Whenua Kawero Amaki Taku Kaianga Inaine, which means my house rests, and literally rests because I'm in my garage in a pole house, so I can almost feel the ground underneath me. And that ground is held in custodianship by the local iwi or tribe, which is called Kawero Amaki. So I pay my respects to them, and I'm here by invitation. I feel honoured and privileged to be here, and probably won't say very much more. But I'm really very pleased to meet you all, and to support you, Gina, and want to acknowledge the work that you've put into to bring us here together tonight.
Kia ora, Keith. Yes, and kia ora koutou. Kua tai mai nei tēnei wā, or I tēnei pō in New Zealand more, which is, you know, here we are in this space tonight, and, you know, welcome and thanks, Keith. All right. Yes, and so how about, I think maybe we'll start with some introductions of who we are and how we come to be here. So how about we start with you, Bianca?
Sure. So I'm Bianca, and following on from Keith's touching in on where we are. So I'm on Kaurna and Paramount country here in South Australia. I'm a Barimaya woman, and so that's from Western Australia. So I'm not on my own country. And I've come to be here because I'm working in this space. I'm doing things a little bit differently to most of you. So yes, I'm a counsellor, but I'm also an equine assisted psychotherapist. So working with horses to help people move through their experiences. And so I'm really honoured to be in this space with all these amazing people and talking about the online space. So yeah, thank you.
Tēnā koe, Bianca. Okay, Gavin?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Gavin. I am a lecturer at Charles Darwin University in Darwin, and I've recently completed a PhD which investigates Indigenous healing practices of the Northern Territory. in response to colonisation. So a lot of the work that I do is in community, and I'm very privileged to have the relationships that I do, and that network now extends into groups such as this. So I very much look forward to the conversation that we'll be having today around a really important topic, and yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Gavi?
Hopefully my internet holds up. I'm very honoured to be here. I'm on Bunurong land, which is outside of Naarm and Victoria. And I guess I'm just struck by the concept of displacement and how much people who have already been massively displaced in a traumatic, multi-generational way have now experienced an additional profound displacement into an online space, and how it can obscure some of the forms of colonizing that happen. When I remember talking to somebody that I was speaking to, actually a Larrakia woman, among other things, and she said that when you go into somebody's space, it's like, you know what space you're on, and it's like people position themselves. But because if you're online, a lot of people don't realize it's still colonizing if someone's coming into your space rather than you coming into theirs, you know, as someone who's invited. And it just really struck me, you know, that we don't see that happening as clearly if it's Zoom, but it's still, I guess I'm honored to be part of this. I'm not from a colonial Australian background, and I'm also not from an Aboriginal Australian background. So I guess I'm in a kind of third space that isn't either of those spaces. I really don't relate to white Anglo-Australian culture, not being a white Anglo-Australian person. And I'm not an Aboriginal person or a Māori person. So I guess I have a vantage point, and yet I would say that I've felt more welcome, more invited, and more included in Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and Māori spaces than I ever did ever do in the white Anglo spaces. So I'm really honoured to be here.
Oh, thank you, Gavi. Taz.
Hey, sorry, it's been raining down here. Yeah, so I've been working in the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander like LGBTI health sector for about 5 years, and I've been using my lived experience around like child protection and all that stuff to advocate for policy changes and that sort of stuff. So, and Garvey actually got me into this because I did a PACFAR training about a month ago around how to, I guess, best work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brother boys, like trans men. So that was a really cool sort of thing that I did, and it's yeah, it's been really rewarding for me, I guess, being able to influence policy and stuff that helps other young people coming through get the best life that they can get. So yeah, that's sort of what I've been doing. But yeah, I'm living here currently on Bundjalung country, but I'm from Palm Island and Mount Isa, known as Boogaman and Kalkadoon. So yeah.
Thank you,
guys.
Taz.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Keith, just in terms of an introduction to, I'm just going to put you on mute, Taz, if you don't mind. Yeah, thanks. Just as a way of introduction to this project and this space. Yeah.
Oh, Tanakwe. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, when we introduce ourselves, we tend to do pepiha, which is like a genealogy, and we'd say things like, or I would say things like, ko hawalen te monga, ko don te awa, ko waka oranga te waka. So I'd be describing my mountain, my river, my waka canoe, and so on. And one of the things that I say in that is he tangata tiriti aho, and you'll see behind me, just here, is a poster of Te Tiriti o Waitangi in Te Reo. So in my pepiha, I sort of sign up, I say, I'm a person of the treaty. Now, I wasn't there in 1840, I didn't sign it, but I'm sort of positioning myself coming into this country, which I've chosen to immigrate to from the UK 11 years ago, and positioning myself in a bicultural relationship to tangata whenua, to Māori, to Māori as tangata whenua, people of the land. I'm, in terms of my day job, I'm a professor of psychotherapy at Auckland University of Technology, and I'm also the editor of a journal called Psychotherapy and Politics International. Part of my own history has been being a political activist alongside being a psychotherapist, and sometimes that's been, as you can imagine, a lot in tension. I tend to fall on the side more of political activism, and particularly as I get older, I sort of just feel more more angry and out there in a good way. So, and as part of the background to this project, Reese, who is the editor of the Pacture Journal, invited me to edit a special issue, and we came together and decided to edit a special issue about our experiences of being online. And I was, because of my commitment to biculturalism here, was very interested to open up or suggest the opening up of this space. And I know Reese talked then to Gina, who's on the board and so on, to have this opportunity to yarn or to kōrero about the impact and something of Gavi, what you're saying about the impact of online in that sort of interface or intersectorality around marginalization, colonialism, post-colonialism, and online. So that was where my interest came from. And I don't often refer to myself as an ally, but I was very touched, Gina, that you invited me as an ally. So at least I'm an ally for tonight. But I don't take that. I don't put that on my CV. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I have to earn that most days. So yeah, I feel very honoured and quite emotional about being invited here. So that's enough from me.
Thank you, Keith, tēnā koe, and also Gavi, just to recognise you both as being invited as true, heartfelt allies for us here today. So thank you. Okay, so as Keith said, Pepiha is how we introduce ourselves. So I'm going to just do that quickly. So ko Takatimu Te Waka, ko Whanganui e Tāra Te Mauna, ko Wainonoro Te Awa, ko Ngāti Kaununu Te Iwi, ko Rangitane Te Hapu, and ko Gina O'Neill Aho. It's my name. Thank you. I am also an Indigenous Gestalt psychotherapist and recently ecotherapist. And I work with Gavin and Bianca on the College of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander healing practices. And I am also doing a little bit of other work with Keith in another article about this very idea of working in the online space with COVID. And I'm also just want to acknowledge Reese Price Robertson, who is the editor of the Pacture Journal that we're coming together to tonight, and that this Zoom kōrero yarn or yarn kōrero, yarn and kōrero in Māori means a yarn as it does in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. I'm not sure if it's exactly all of them, but I know that it's a common term that we all know about here. I moved to Australia 25 years ago, so I've spent now basically half my life in both places. So I too bring the experience of the bicultural nature of working in these two countries, and I'm very honoured to be sitting on a Rakwa land in Bundjalung country this evening. And also want to say that being Māori and living and working here on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander country, that I can say that I stand in solidarity with all that we do. So thank you. Okay, so I'm really aware of the time, so I just want to keep this really quick, that tonight we are recording what will be a Zoom article, which in my mind is the first of its kind, really. We wanted to take this documentation through the very platforms that the online platform, and Zoom being a popular one, that we've come to know more during COVID, and also to honour the Indigenous, all of our Indigenous experience, that not everything is written. It is actually about sharing and transmitting knowledge through yarning. And so that's how it came to be, that we will, so that's what we're doing, making this article a Zoom recording. So all of us in this group today will be listed as authors, and it will be referenced like a standard academic article. And we'll all have a chance to see the article and the draft before it's finalised and published. So I just really want everybody to know that we're all part of this every step of the way. Right, well, are there any other questions before we start? So, yep, great. Okay, so I'll be facilitating and aware of the time, and hopefully we get to yarn through and korero through some of the questions. But I guess the first question that I'm really interested in is, what is it like being an Indigenous therapist or healing practitioner or counsellor during the COVID-19 pandemic in the online environment? And I'd be really interested, you know, to hear from you guys about how that's been.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Gina. Great question. It's been a unique year, if in a number of respects, obviously very much related to the symptoms of the restrictions around COVID-19. I represent the West in my background, in terms of the fact that I have Indigenous children, but I come from a colonising background myself. So I'm in that really interesting space that speaking with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and occupying that space. But it's been a unique year, and a lot of the work that I've been doing has been in relation to how to adapt non-Western, non-biomedical healing practices, psychotherapy practices, to a whole range of populations. In the Northern Territory, I'm dealing a lot with Aboriginal communities, but making sure that the healing that's being offered is culturally appropriate. That's, I guess, the initial standpoint from my perspective. And I've been leaning on the work and been working in conjunction with some key elders in Aboriginal communities. And there's one that I'd like to mention from the Daly River community, the Nauya community, which is pictured behind me. Her name is Miriam Rose Ungerman Borman, who's just been herself named MT Senior Person of the Year. She talks about this healing spiritual practice of Darjiti, and we've been working around how the practice of Darjiti can work. Obviously, it works on country, and you need to respect the place for which it's born, but also how that use of Darjiti as a healing practice can be used off country in different contexts, whether that be solitary in small groups or online platforms like this one. And we've been working across the last 8 or 9 months around how do we take those really strong tenets, those healing practices that are centered around Darjiti, and use those in spaces where traditionally it wasn't found. So COVID's been, it's put a whole lot of restrictions and confinement through isolation and displacement from family, displacement from country. It's forced people into their own space where, if they feel comfortable and connected, that's great. If you're in an Aboriginal community in Daly River, for example, and you're in country and you're confined, that's fantastic. But what healing practices are available for people who are off country and confined and in a space that they don't feel comfortable with? And that's the work that I've been doing with a number of Aboriginal elders and communities in the Northern Territory over the last half a year or so.
Beautiful. Thanks, Gavin. Bianca, I know, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm ready. So I've actually started off busy. An Aboriginal practitioner during COVID is extremely, extremely busy. But what an opportunity. I am seeing more people reach out and access help when they may not previously have done so, because they don't need to go anywhere. Well, they couldn't go anywhere for quite some time, but they don't need to go anywhere. They can be safe in their homes and in their space, and they can choose to turn the camera on or turn the camera off. And to bring Aboriginality into the space has been really interesting and really fun. Normally before we started the recording, I normally have a cuppa, and I suggest people go and get themselves a cuppa, and we just act as though there's no such thing as a camera here, and not act, but really feel that. And I think it's really important that we see the opportunity for what it is, and we have the ability to reach so many more people that may not have accessed help before. And now people can actually say, I want an Indigenous practitioner. I want an Indigenous counsellor or psychotherapist, and actually be able to access someone, which is, huge. It's a really exciting time to be in. For people accessing services, I think that's probably the biggest.
And there's not many Indigenous healing practitioners around, and so the online environment has really enabled us to be able to be accessible.
Yeah, definitely. And people to actually now understand that they can request an Aboriginal practitioner, or Indigenous, whatever country you're from. And the other interesting thing I've found is that non-Indigenous people, such as from India, that people that are living, migrants that are here, are actually choosing to access Indigenous counsellors or psychotherapists, because we get cultural obligations, we get different things that maybe aren't necessarily standard practice. And so I'm finding that's also increased the workload, because people are now thinking about something, it's easier for them.
Yeah.
You're acknowledging a different knowledge system and value system, healing system, and you don't have to be Indigenous to respect that, but all of a sudden that privileged position of the West, of the white European, that the colonised knowledge which has been privileged for so long is now a knowledge, but it's not the knowledge. And COVID kind of has accelerated this space in some respects. What you're talking about, Bianca, and the work that you do is amazing.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Was there anyone else who wanted to respond to that question? I just wanted to say something quickly about my experience that I've noticed is that because I was working in Sydney prior to moving up here, and if people couldn't really come to my practice, I couldn't really see them. And there was a couple of people that had contacted me, and they were outside of Sydney. And when COVID kicked in, they contacted me and said, oh, I'm imagining you're on Zoom now. Can we do some work? And they're both Aboriginal, and it's just been a delight and because I'm an ecotherapist, they often sit, somewhere in nature or somewhere where they're on country and we work with, the rocks and the trees and whatever's really important for them. So yes, I just relate to what you were saying, Bianca and Gavin, about access. Taz,
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I think with Zoom, it's been good to see the government step up and really take, I guess, initiative finally, I guess, to like source funding and actually find a viable way for people to continue their healthcare needs outside of, having to go get transport to go to somewhere physically. It's been good to see that, there's like telehealth that's been bulk built so that people can see the psychiatrists and psychologists and stuff like that. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Access is really important, and it's always been an issue, I think, in Indigenous circles or health. Okay, so I guess the opposite to what we've just spoken about is what components of our protocols or Indigenous therapeutic methods or whatever we use might be lost in the online environment.
I think that that whole connection, that ability to be able to reach out and draw in the sand. And I'm also, I call it Barnum Ban, so country medicine. So, just those things. I'm finding I'm drawing pictures now and I'm holding them up and trying to make sure that people can see them. So it's required us to be inventive, but there is some small things lost in that way, and that whole relational ability to be able to be able to touch someone if it's needed. And it's that lack of extra security of, if someone switches off, they switch off, and they're, as in turns Zoom off or whatever, and then won't answer their phone. Or I think that can be really quite, there's a risk involved in that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, I think the main thing is being able to touch and draw in the sand. I mean, I still use community protocols, cultural protocols when we yarn. Even if, same thing, you were just talking before about picking up your phone and walking outside and sitting down. I sometimes do stuff with the horses that way too, and the horses are coming in and the dogs are coming in. And but yeah, you have to be really careful about losing some of that stuff, the relational stuff.
Thank you, Bianca. I was just going, go Gavin, yep.
Sorry, Gina. Just to continue on from your comments there, Bianca, about connection, I think that's a really important thing that can be at risk of being lost. But relational trauma requires relational healing, and sometimes what can happen is, if you take Indigenous healing practices out of its context, it can be in danger of becoming colonized and morphed into some sort of Western biomedical sphere. And that was the danger, of incorporating Indigenous healing practices in sort of primary healthcare settings, like a community clinic or so forth, where the practice loses its integrity and becomes something else. It's not black and it's not white, and it's just a greyness where this loses its integrity and its effectiveness. And then as a result, the West then have an opportunity to criticise the Indigenous healing practice because it's lost its effectiveness, because it's lost its integrity. I think my experience so far this year in relation to that has been that these online platforms have kind of kept that integrity in place. And I think it's been the expertise of the Aboriginal health worker, the Indigenous health worker, to privilege the protocols which are so important to what we're talking about, and being able to execute that in different spaces. And online has certainly been accelerated because of the year that we've had. And yeah, I think that's really important.
Beautiful. And I'd just like to acknowledge Hinewerangi Kohu Morgan. We had a bit of email and there was something that she mentioned about the Maori, which is the breath of life that gets exchanged, that can get lost, or is lost, right? And for me, to be able to feel somebody, and that kind of a relational co-regulation, I don't think it's completely lost, but it takes a lot more to feel it and understand it through more of a verbal exchange, rather than the feeling. That is what gets lost for me a little bit.
I can still feel that energy though. I can feel when someone's heart is really heavy. I feel my heart feeling heavy, but it requires a lot more holding of the space, I think, than when you're in this kind of space.
Yeah, it's more of a given when you're face to face in the room, but there's just some more attunement, or really meeting that all of me into that screen. Yeah, Taz, we did say something.
Yeah. So I'm running out of battery real quick, so I just had to put it on like the least sort of battery consuming mode. But I was looking at the social and emotional well-being framework when I was thinking about what to talk about, and I think for some of my friends anyway, like Mob and that, they when COVID happened and everyone had to go into lockdown, like a lot of my friends were, I guess, displaced on different countries that they weren't usually used to or they're not from, and being away from home is one of those things that can also, it really takes a toll on the well-being of someone. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And being some people in their previous traumas that they've experienced, I think that whole idea of having to be contained inside four walls for a long period of time would have made help seeking and stuff like that a lot harder, to I guess do. So
Beautiful, thanks for that. So I guess that we've kind of already started edging into that, but the next question is what components of our protocols, our cultural protocols do translate and are useful in the online environment. And I think, Bianca, you spoke a little bit more to that. And just coming in previous to the recording, you holding up and bringing close to the camera so we could see the rocks and the pieces of wood from. Do you want to speak a little bit more to that?
So on the side of me, because for me it's really important, especially when you're doing back-to-back sessions via a medium like this. I mean, some days I'm 5 or 6 hours on Zoom, which can be quite heavy. Garvey, I can see you nodding away. But I've got things here to remind me, and quite often I'll just be holding, this is from Birthing Tree on the property I live on. I live on a farm, and I always keep a piece of this with me, so I can feel grounded if things are getting really heavy. And then rocks as well. This is a beautiful piece of granite, and I invite you all to come here and experience it one day. The whole property's full of these rocks, and they are really grounding. But then I've also got a friend makes bush medicine, and sometimes just rubbing this on me while I'm I call it yarning. I mean, it's a counselling session, but can be really, really helpful. And just having beauty around me and bringing that into the space, bringing the outside in. I look, as you can see through the windows, you know, I can see down over the valley and I can hear the birds singing. So I'm actually, I don't really feel like I'm in a room. I actually bring, you know, country in. And I think that's really important, to not feel that you're in, you know, this clinical four-walled space, but you're everywhere around you. There is grounding and supporting things, and I feel the breeze on my skin, and everything about that is honouring the space. And I think that's really important for me.
Thank you, Bianca.
People to do the same thing.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say that when you were talking about that before, and I mentioned it, and again now, that I even felt the support of all these pieces that you're offering deeply, and I'm only imagining that that would be the same for your clients and the people that you work with.
I actually encourage them to go outside and find, you know, ask for permission from the tree to pick up a piece that's fallen and bring it inside, and we talk about that stuff as well. We talk about what that's like for them, and how and now that people can go back to country if they were stuck off country, being able to actually you know, just recommended someone today, you know, find a piece that's from country that you know you've been given permission to bring back with you, so that you have that country, you have your country with you everywhere. And it's really important, especially for people who are working in the health space as well.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree, and you can see with the backgrounds of us all that you can create. Well, you know, when we're dealing with people, you know, quite often we're dealing with people who are in a tough time or are dealing with trauma, and their sense of their place of safety is under pressure, and it's about, you know, I think we've been able to, through these online platforms, create an embodied place of safety. And there's some common characteristics with the Indigenous healing practices around what does safety look like, what does it feel like, what does it smell like, all the things that you were talking about there, Bianca. And we've been, I think to some extent, or to a large extent, we've been able to replicate those strong characteristics which are centered in Indigenous healing practices, and being able to translate those in an online environment without losing its impact and without changing its structural integrity. And it's testament to the healing practices themselves that they're so adaptable, but it's also shown everyone, whether the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, all the way through to, you know, the West, that once again, Indigenous knowledges and practice and so forth are so adaptable in a whole range of different contexts, and this online context now is under investigation.
Beautiful. Yes, exactly. It reminds me of that book that Tyson Yunkaporta Porter wrote about Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And I feel like we're making our little piece to, you know, bring our cultural practice and voice to, you know, perhaps being part of that too. And I would agree that about, you know, often people, their safety, you know, is compromised in trauma, and there's something really powerful and that isolation that they feel. And there's something very powerful by asking them to go to country, or how are you being responded to right now by country? And often my clients will say, wow, I can really feel that breeze is cooling down the heat of my crisis. You know, I'm hot, my body, you know, it's helping me to cool. Or I might say, well, where is a true ally or a good resource for you right now? And they go and come back, like what you were saying, Bianca, with something that really helps to anchor them into their space and their safety. Yeah, it's very important. I've just got a message from Clay. He can't stay. His phone's about to die. Did you want to say goodbye, Taz, if you're there?
Just quickly before my phone dies. Yeah. So, sorry guys to have to take off so soon into the conversation, but I really enjoyed being able to be a part of this and the opportunities, and yeah, it was really awesome to work with you guys, and hopefully I be able to still contribute via email. So yeah, thank you everyone for welcoming me into this space. Sorry.
Thank you, Taz. It's been wonderful to have you, brother boy. And also, yeah, and also would love further contact via email.
Yeah. That's an awesome job you guys do. So thank you.
And you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you guys. You guys have a good weekend.
Good day.
All right. See you. Bye.
Bye. And such is the nature of online work. These things happen. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just thinking now, there's a couple of questions, but I'm looking at the time and I think I'd like to bring in the question about how do we see the future of the online environment for Indigenous therapy? Yeah, we've spoken about what's maybe a little bit lost and what are the true many advantages of what we bring online. But what do we think about the future of the online environment for Indigenous therapies?
I'll jump in. I think one of the great positives out of COVID-19, the isolation, the confinement, all the rest of what we've experienced through the year has been the acceleration of being able to showcase Indigenous healing practices in contexts which didn't traditionally perhaps even belong or exist. You know, online platforms similar to the ones that we're talking about today have been very Western places, very European. You know, it's the holders of the knowledge. It's all the parts of privileged society whose voices are privileged, who have all the socio-economic advantage, have had power over this type of an online environment. It was their knowledges that were reflected here, and I think across the last COVID span, we've seen a real ignition around providing support for marginalised populations, and unfortunately across Australia and beyond, that they do reflect large percentages of Indigenous people. It's offering assistance, support and healing that is culturally relevant, and as a result of that, we've seen a real escalation in the propagation, I guess, of a whole range of platforms similar to the one that we're talking about today. And I think the future's bright. Even in the research space, in 2020 alone, there's been a huge increase in spike in alternate healing practices beyond that of the traditional biomedical Western model.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah, it's breaking down barriers, right? For our knowledge to be transmitted in a way that's true for us. You know, our authority around that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, without COVID, I think that this would have been a really forced space, like a lot of this type of knowledge is in the Western world. But as a result of the chasm which has been created from COVID, that there's been this flow which has been able to sort of occur organically, and while everyone's, while the West has been, their attention has been sort of directed back to the self, we've seen this real flow and opening up of this space, which is, I think, and I think we're charged with the responsibility to make sure that we take this opportunity forward as well. That it's not just something that we see a big influx because of what's happened, and then we just go back to status quo once things go back to normal.
Yeah, like a spreading out of like the healing for, marginalized or populations which haven't really had the dominant voice to be able to really provide a lot of healing through this platform to people that wouldn't have got it. Yeah, there's power in that. Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Bianca?
Yeah, I think, you know, what Gavin was saying as well, you know, the opportunity we've got, it requires the therapist to be really, to really think outside the square, because this can be quite confronting for the therapist as well. I mean, quite often you see people doing their hair and, you know, things like that. But we have to be really thinking about how we can set our spaces up, how we can remove the obstacle of it being in this virtual space. And that requires some thinking and some skill, but there is amazing opportunity. You've got people now in rural and remote areas that may not be able to access the expertise that they're looking for, whether that be, you know, a mental health side, or whether that be a traditional healing practice, or what it might be. Now that barrier's just been removed, and it's encouraging people to seek help. So I just see this space getting bigger and bigger. We've just removed all these barriers, and but it does require the therapist to be creative and inventive and really hold space. The one thing I do get concerned about is that burnout. People think, oh yeah, it's just 5 hours or whatever, but that when you're in this kind of space where everything you do is, you know, the person's watching you, that can be quite, it requires you to hold a lot of energy. And so, yeah, I think that stuff does need to be touched on. But yeah, opportunity.
It's a new skill to hold this online space. It's not something that I've had a great deal of experience with up until this year. I've probably had a couple of thousand hours since COVID, but it's a new skill that we've got to learn. And, you know, we've been forced into it and it's accelerated it. But yeah, you're right, Bianca. It does take a lot of energy. It is a new space to hold. And you've also got to acknowledge also that the person that you're working with or speaking to may not, their space may not be that great. It might be filled with uncertainty, with fear, with isolation, perhaps locked up with, you know, a perpetrator of domestic violence, for example. So, yeah, there's a lot to acknowledge in the space that you're talking about, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's something I've come across too, like being around where there's people and, you know, not really having a private space, and stepping out of therapist role and just saying, hey, being an advocate, hey, can we find a space? Like, and being able to really, I feel being Indigenous, I can easily translate between those spaces, because I've always been, apart from the actual therapeutic encounter, there's always other things with my Indigenous clients that we're always advocating for and always oscillating between, like, you know, financial issues and like all sorts of other issues, domestic violence, what's going on. And I think coming into the Zoom and being at home and all the different associated risks, challenges, but also beautiful exchanges that can happen with that as well as the actual therapy. But yeah, there is a lot of side things around that I find I'm managing as well, which, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a new environment. Yeah. And burnout is a very big thing, like sitting down in front of this space for a long time. How do I look after myself in that? Yeah. And I see you, Bianca, with all of the things that help you to stay well and safe in your space as you hold it for another. Yeah, and that's important.
Yeah, it's super important. And also, I think, you know, how you were just saying, Gina, about, you know, acknowledging what's happening out here. Sometimes, kids are going to run in, and or their
Yeah.
cat just jumps up. I acknowledge that. We have a little
Yeah.
yarn with the child. Hey, how you going? Yeah, I'm in this space, and then they move off again. Or having their pet come in can bring a greater sense of safety for that person. Let's just focus on the cat for a little while. And they try and shoo it away. And then when I say, no, it's okay, then that just changes the environment. It becomes more natural. Yeah. Because we wouldn't be shushing away an animal if we were in the space of this physical space. And so I think, I just see it as opportunities, really.
Yeah, I do too. And I think it goes against some of the training that I've had around, boundaries, strict, got to be, here in the room, and it's got to be no interruptions. And, a lot of my Indigenous clients all through my career, they've bought kids because they have to. And it's just like, well, that translates easily for me, the online space, and it is an opportunity. Yeah, great. Gavin?
I was just going to say, just adding on to your points there, that in Aboriginal communities, remote Aboriginal communities around the country, particularly the Northern Territory, those seeking mental health support in community are entirely dependent upon one type of model, and that is a very Western type of intervention. And that has its strengths, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't reflect, and it probably never has, the cultural awareness and safety, which is really important and featured in the Indigenous healing practices that we're talking about today. And mobile phone usage in Aboriginal communities are amongst the highest in Australia's population. I mean, it's extremely high. It's very widespread, even in remote Aboriginal communities in the Territory. And for them to be able to get to use social media in a way that gets culturally appropriate support opens up a whole new avenue of staffing non-Indigenous service provision in Aboriginal communities, in terms of education, health and social work, and a variety of different contexts, and removes the issue around that creating a place of safety in an Aboriginal community where you've got constant turnover of staff, for example, which is just one variable of so many, where you start to create a relationship with the person in the room, and then that worker leaves, another one comes in, and that relationship needs to be built again. This type of online platform, you have far more certainty, which is ironic, considering sort of the nature of how this has all evolved in our lives. Far more certainty around being able to know what to expect, more adaptability, that we don't have to just sit in a room provided by a Westerner, which privileges Western views and Western healing, Western knowledges. We've got cats, maybe it's outside, maybe it's wherever the person feels most comfortable.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, exactly. I'm aware that our time is coming to a close, and I just wanted to invite us all to think about how, Keith and Garvey, if you wanted to make any comment about what we've been talking about at all briefly, and then we'll, just think about, I invite Bianca and Gavin and myself to just finish off with our experience of today and anything else we wanted to add around what we've been talking about. So yeah, Keith or Garvey, yeah.
I guess what strikes me about what you're saying is, I think it's not just Aboriginal people, but when you were talking before about how, I think Bianca was saying that people feel more comfortable going to an Aboriginal therapist, even if they're not an Aboriginal person, but if they don't feel heard by the white Anglo norms of therapy. And I can really relate to that, because if I were looking for a therapist within Australia, I would not go to someone who wasn't an Aboriginal person. I just don't know that I'd be understood, even though I'm not an Aboriginal person. And I think a couple of the things that I think really strike me as you're talking is, first of all, how much the that sort of Anglo-centric view of what a boundary is and what it does and who needs a boundary and how much of yourself are you supposed to put into the space for it to be a genuinely healing encounter. And I know that there's, in a lot of the spaces I move in, the communities I move in, there's a real disconnect where there's people in ethics bodies or people who working as supervisors who say things like lived experience is inappropriate, you should never share it, it's always unethical. And we've got people in our communities, and we've got research in our communities saying, we need to know. We don't even want to talk to you if we don't know where you're coming from, whether you have the same lived experience or not. We have to know, because we have to know how to keep ourselves safe with you and how to navigate that encounter. And I was really struck when Keith was saying, yes, that positionality, and that is missing from that idea of boundaries and idea of ethics. And I'm just thinking of some of the early work that I did where, because of some of the languages I speak overseas, I was given a role. I was working with people with a language I did speak, and then I was given other people because they said, well, you don't speak English, so I'll just give you all the non-English speaking people. If I didn't speak that language, and there were no other people who spoke that language. So I ended up having to, in this community team, provide services. And I thought, what on earth am I going to do to be appropriate to these people? And what I learned was that there's something really powerful about sitting down, and this was a home visit, sitting down at someone's kitchen table, allowing them to give you a drink and sitting and being and sharing a drink with them without an agenda, without a clipboard, without a little tick box sheet where you're judging them and fitting them in a little box and giving them a number, and allowing whoever they wanted to be in that space to be in that space with you. That is what they found healing. And there was such a profound disconnect, and there still is such a profound disconnect. So I feel like the wisdom that each of you has shared tonight is a wisdom that I do not see represented in findings by things like Productivity Commission that says low-level non-clinical providers. I think that actually the more distressed someone is, the more clinical a service they need, the more important their safety and attunement is to have someone who is a healing practitioner. And I think of someone like Taz, who does that work, but doesn't have a title, doesn't have the credibility, isn't part of that system, and yet does so much good and saves people's lives, but doesn't have a structure to support him in that. And it makes me think there's a real need for a shift in what we think of as ethics and boundaries, so that idea of positionality being ethics, that idea of advocacy as a professional duty, that when I work with an Aboriginal person, it's not enough what I say in the space. It's not enough to kind of nod and smile, oh, yes, you've been through intergenerational trauma, but it's about who I am everywhere, not just in that space. And people know if you're not that person everywhere, you're not that person with me. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And I'm really honored to be here. I'm very honored.
Thank you, Garvey. Appreciate it. Very important. Keith?
Well, I want to just to continue the theme of being honoured. It's been lovely, and the time has flown. I sort of think, oh, I want to do another hour. I'm in this sort of space, time space was gone. But thank you. And I just the irony. I think Garvey, you just quoted this low level clinical provider. I think, wow, I want to be a low level clinical provider because that means I'm nearer the ground.
Oh, beautiful.
And I have railed against these concepts of relational depth, and I'm thinking, why not? Why don't we talk about relational width?
Yeah.
It's like this is privileging of some sort of archaeological, geological layers of self, which is the Freudian tradition and so on. Anyway, I just wanted to riff a little bit off what you'd said because it was so beautiful and poignant. What I have really learned from today is what I noticed about particularly the three of you, four of you speaking was your optimism. It really struck me, that you are, it's like you're and particularly Bianca, you exude it. And I wanted to turn I was realizing I was on mute out of respect because of background noise, but of course when I'm on mute you don't hear my sort of so that's interesting in terms of where online culture has sort of taken over that relational space, and so in some ways I want to sort of unmute everybody and just have all the burps and whatever. So there's something about your optimism and seeing, and both particularly Gavin and Bianca and Eugene also talked about that opportunity, which I just thought was very lovely and generous and open. And I think, yeah, of course, it means that we can reach, distant parts. And that's probably more true of Australia, but to some extent true here of Aotearoa. It means I can work with somebody in Southland, or a colleague can work with somebody in Northland, So I'm taking that away. And also, I think that thing about the equalizing space, in some ways, it's a tension, because we could be invading somebody's space at the same time they could be, not sharing their picture. But I do think there's the opportunity for a different relationship with space online. So that was another thing. I guess my concern is that I heard you all talk about being busier than ever. Gavin, you talked about thousands of hours. Bianca, you talked about, I'm busy. So as an ally, as I'm being called an ally, I guess my thought is, and I'm not expecting you to answer, but where I'm left with is, how can I help my Indigenous colleagues, brothers, sisters, however you identify, with that? Is there anything that I and other allies can do to support you so that you don't get burnt out, so that you don't get overloaded? I mean, one obvious thing, and I've been trying to work on this in the context of education and training, is educating and training more, in this country, more Māori students, because I think we should. I just think it's the right thing to do. But I'm just aware that in this exciting, opportunistic, expansive time, you could end up yet again more overloaded, more overworked, more demanded on, and so on. And I care about that, and I worry about that. So I suppose that's also what I'm taking away. But I think also what I'm taking away is that heart, and I'm looking particularly at you, Bianca, and your enthusiasm and the rocks. And I have a bit of a relationship with rocks back in the UK, or certain stones anyway, and sacred stones. And I just think, wow, we can communicate. Strangers can communicate pretty much heart to heart across this strange and wonderful medium. So ngā mihi nui, a big mihi, a big thanks to you for all your mahi. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. That means greetings to you all, including me. Yeah, it's been a complete privilege.
Wow. Tēnā koe, Keith. Beautiful.
And I'm not going to go back on mute so you can hear my
Okay, great. Gavin and Bianca, any final thoughts?
I'll jump in if that's okay. So Bianca can quite rightly have the last word. Look, you're 100% right there, Keith. Bianca fills the screen, Gina does as well, and Gavi. The short time that we've known each other, you can certainly pick up a presence amongst the group, and it's a privilege to be here. Keith, your point about burnout is a valid one, and it's not an excuse to be burnt out not to get this right. It can't be. It was too much and it became too hard, so then I had to stop. We need to work out a way, a model for us all to make sure that what we do now, we get it right, because we have a very privileged position. Gina mentioned earlier about all of us in this team sit on, and the primary objective of that group is to accredit, validate Indigenous healing practices in exactly the same way that we would do for a Western healing modality. So they're seen as equals, and we've created a real chasm of opportunity there, but that's what it is at the moment. It's an opportunity, and it's our responsibility to get that right. And as an ally myself, I feel a great sense of responsibility to ensure that I carry the load in a way which helps people now, but also we get the job done, because that's really important.
Beautiful. Thanks, Gavin. I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to, talk back to Keith around what we're doing in terms of educating and trying to have more practitioners and getting our work out there so other people can do it. Thank you. Okay, Bianca, the last word rests with you.
Lived experience is really important. We need more people, more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander practitioners, and also in New Zealand as well. We need more people seeing this as a valid way of giving back to community, of helping people. Also, we need to make sure that we look after ourselves. I do this. It's not just a beauty thing. I do this to protect and look after myself, and I spend most of my time outside on country, and it is my self-care. I go and sit by the pond and make sure that I give time to listen to the birds and feel the wind. I think we need to make sure we look after ourselves, otherwise we can't help anyone. And if we are struggling with our own self-care, then how do you hold relationship for anybody? And yeah, so I think that's really important. The volume of people, there needs to be so many more people, so many more Indigenous practitioners seeing that this is a valid way to go, that their skills and lived experience is recognised, which is, as you said, that's what that group is about, and that we think that there's a different way of doing things like this medium, and recognising when we are getting to that point of needing a break, of not getting to burnout, because there's too few of us in this healing profession to risk losing one. And yeah, and so I think it's all about us all supporting each other, looking after each other, encouraging more people, and that our training systems are indigenised. This is not about I can tell you that I spend most of my time with my shoes off, okay, and or sitting in the dirt, which is certainly not what my training told me I was allowed to do. And I think it's about tipping the training on its edge a bit, not discarding it, because there's some amazing, fantastic things about our training, which is great, but changing the space, that this clinical 4-room space is not the only valid healing way. And yes, so thumbs up to all of us.
Yeah, and that we're part of country. We're part of this earth, and yeah, that it's reciprocated. Yeah.
And language. Beautiful. I think language is so important. It warms my heart to hear even non-Aboriginal people speak my language, and they go, oh, there's that minion dog or whatever, and I see these little kids, and it's so fantastic, and it becomes just accepted, and language is really healing. And I mentioned language specifically because we have been using language tonight, but also last night was obviously the opening premiere of The Furnace, which is filmed on my country, and Buddy Maya has been spoken in language. It's been spoken on the big screen, which was really exciting to see. And let's not avoid bringing language or country or energy into our spaces. Let's embrace that. This is what makes us so sought after. It's our heart, it's our energy, it's we do things differently. That's what it's about.
Tihei Mauri ora. That's what we say to that. Yes, absolutely. Oh, my heart is just filled with so much warmth, and I'm noticing it's raining here, and as we've been talking, the rain's been falling, and when I look back at the trees now on the mountain, everything has a freshness. It's been nourished, and that's how I feel right now. I feel very nourished by the space. Thank you, Bianca, for finishing us up. Thank you, Keith and Garvey, for your allyship, and thank you, Gavin and Bianca, for your beautiful insights. And I feel very honoured to have been tasked with bringing everybody together. And thank you very much, mainly for your time in this space.
Been a pleasure.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you. And for the conversation, for starting the conversation about Indigenous practitioners being in this space. I think that is going to be, I can't wait to read the article because it's going to be really interesting and hopefully get people thinking.
Yeah,
And just
exactly.
Just on that, Gina, I wondered if I noticed that you halfway through or at some point you said, oh, we've got some more questions, but we're not going to get to those. I actually wondered if we could get to those through the process of writing the article, that there's no reason why, if, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know, Reese might have a view about this, but that you couldn't ask those other questions and people could respond, but by writing them or by speaking them, as it were, on paper, could go from there. And
beautiful.
Maybe even could be a way of including Hiniwirangi afterwards,
Yeah, that'd be beautiful. And Taz, because he had to go early, and he made that offer. Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
beautiful. Well, yeah, let's do that. So I'll annoy you again a little bit after this, and love to hear your responses. And thank you.
Kia ora.
Yeah. Kia ora.
Ka kite.
Yeah, ka kite anō. Mā te wā, Gavin and Bianca. See you. Bye.
Bye.